The Sacred Band, the undefeated army built on love that brought Sparta to its knees. Did you know that one of the most feared military units in ancient history was an army built entirely from pairs of lovers? 150 couples, 300 men, who fought side by side for 40 years without a single defeat. Ancient Greece, 378 BC. Their commanders believed that a soldier would fight harder, endure more, and never retreat when the person standing next to him was the person he loved most. They were called the Sacred Band of Thebes. They destroyed the myth of Spartan invincibility. They changed the history of Greece forever, and their final stand, facing the young Alexander the Great, ended in a way that made even their conqueror weep. To understand why Thebes created the Sacred Band, you first have to understand what Thebes was living through in the years before 378 BC. Sparta, the city whose name has become synonymous with military discipline and martial culture, dominated Greece following its victory in the Peloponnesian War in 404 BC. After defeating Athens and its allies, Sparta imposed its authority across the Greek world with the confidence of a power that had never lost a land battle in living memory. Spartan soldiers were, in the military imagination of the ancient world, simply the best. Unbeatable, a fact of life like the rising of the sun. Thebes, a prosperous city in the region of Boeotia in central Greece, experienced Spartan dominance firsthand. In 382 BC, a Spartan garrison occupied the Theban citadel, the Cadmea, and for 3 years, Spartan soldiers controlled the heart of the city. This was not an abstract political humiliation. It was a daily, visible, physically present domination. Spartan soldiers walked the streets of Thebes. Spartan authority overrode Theban law. The city that had produced poets, athletes, and philosophers was garrisoned like a conquered town. In 379 BC, a small group of Theban exiles returned secretly, assassinated the Spartan-backed rulers, and drove the garrison from the Cadmea. Thebes was free, but free in the way that a man who has just escaped from a much larger opponent is free. The danger had not gone away. It had simply stepped back a few paces. Sparta still existed. Sparta still dominated Greece, and Sparta was not going to accept the expulsion of its garrison without response. In this context, a city that had just experienced occupation, that knew Sparta could return at any time, that needed to build a military capability capable of resisting the most powerful army in Greece, a general named Gorgidas proposed something that had never been tried before. He would create an elite unit, not large, not built on numbers, built on something that Gorgidas believed was a more powerful military foundation than any training regimen or any tactical doctrine that Sparta had ever developed. He would build it on love. The idea behind the Sacred Band was not original to Gorgidas, though his implementation of it was. It was rooted in a philosophical argument about human psychology and combat motivation that had been circulating in Greek intellectual culture for decades. The argument appears most famously in Plato's Symposium, a dialogue about the nature of love written approximately around the time the Sacred Band was being formed, in which a character named Phaedrus makes the military case for love with striking precision. The argument goes like this: what makes a soldier fight effectively? Training matters, equipment matters, leadership matters. But the deepest driver of combat effectiveness is the question of what a soldier is willing to die for. What consequence is so unacceptable that they will endure anything to avoid it? Fear of death is a motivator, but it cuts both ways. It can drive men to fight harder, but it can also drive them to run. Fear of shame, the terror of being seen as a coward by people whose opinion you value, is a more reliable motivator, because it operates even when death is the likely outcome of continuing to fight. And who, Phaedrus asks in Plato's account, are you most afraid of disappointing? Whose opinion of you matters more than your own life? The person you love. A man fighting beside a stranger will calculate the odds and sometimes choose to run. A man fighting beside the person he loves will not run, because running means being seen as a coward by the one witness whose judgment he cannot bear. Gorgidas took this philosophical argument and built an army out of it. He selected 300 men, 150 pairs, and organized them specifically as couples. The relationship type in the ancient Greek social framework was the bond between an Erastes, an older, more experienced warrior who served as protector and mentor, and an Eromenos, a younger man who was his student and companion. This was a recognized social institution in ancient Greek culture, particularly in military contexts, carrying obligations of loyalty, protection, and mutual development. By pairing warriors who already loved each other and stationing them together in combat, Gorgidas was not doing something culturally strange by the standards of his world. He was doing something militarily innovative, systematically weaponizing the most powerful motivator available to him. The Sacred Band was not simply a philosophical experiment. It was a military unit, and it was trained accordingly. According to the historical sources, primarily Plutarch's life of Pelopidas, which is the most detailed surviving account of the Sacred Band. The unit trained continuously, lived together in a dedicated barracks at state expense, and was subjected to a level of physical and tactical preparation that went beyond what ordinary Theban soldiers experienced. The physical training drew on two distinct traditions. The first was pankration, the ancient Greek combat sport that combined wrestling, striking, and grappling in a form that had no rules except biting and gouging. Pankration was an Olympic event and practical combat training simultaneously, and the level of physical conditioning it required was extreme even by ancient standards. Men who competed in pankration at the Olympic level were among the most physically capable human beings in the ancient world, and the Sacred Band trained in this tradition not for sport, but to build the raw physical capability needed to fight in the close-quarters brutality of hoplite warfare. The second training tradition was dance. This is the detail that modern audiences tend to find most surprising, but it made complete military sense within the context of how Greek armies actually fought. Greek hoplite warfare was fought in the phalanx, a tight formation of shield-bearers with overlapping shields, thrusting long spears at an opposing formation. The effectiveness of the phalanx depended entirely on coordination. Everyone stepping forward together, everyone maintaining their position in the line, everyone responding to the collective rhythm of the formation rather than acting as an individual. The military dance traditions of ancient Greece, practiced at religious festivals and civic ceremonies, trained exactly this capacity. The ability to move in perfect synchronization with the people on either side of you was what made a phalanx deadly rather than just a crowd of armed men. The Sacred Band practiced both, and the result was a unit that could fight with the individual ferocity of trained combat specialists while maintaining the collective coordination that made phalanx warfare decisive. The first major test of the Sacred Band came at the Battle of Tegeira in 375 BC. The circumstances were not favorable. A Theban force, including the Sacred Band, was returning from a mission in Thessaly when it encountered a significantly larger Spartan force blocking its path home. According to Plutarch's account, one of the Theban commanders reportedly said, "We have fallen into our enemy's hands." The other commander, Pelopidas, who had by this point taken command of the Sacred Band and was transforming it from a defensive unit into an offensive weapon, reportedly responded, "Why should they not have fallen into ours?" This exchange is almost certainly a later literary construction, but it captures something real about the psychological difference between the two forces at Tegeira. The Spartans were larger in number, operating on the confidence of an army that had not lost a significant land engagement in living memory. The Sacred Band was smaller, but it was fighting as a unit built on a different principle, one in which retreat was not a calculated option, but an emotional impossibility. Pelopidas made an aggressive decision that contradicted every conventional military calculation of the situation. Rather than attempting to find a way around the Spartan force or organizing a defensive formation to minimize casualties while extracting his unit, he attacked directly at the Spartan commanders, specifically targeting the officers who led the enemy formation. The logic was psychological as much as tactical. Kill the commanders, create confusion, break the organizational coherence that made the Spartan formation effective. It worked. The two Spartan commanders were killed early in the engagement. The Spartan formation, leaderless and confused, failed to maintain its usual discipline. The Sacred Band pushed through. The Spartan force, which outnumbered the Thebans significantly, parted to let them pass. It was the first time in the historical record that a Spartan army had opened its ranks to let an enemy pass through, rather than holding formation. The myth of Spartan invincibility had developed its first crack. 6 years after Tegeira at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, the crack became a fracture that destroyed Spartan dominance over Greece permanently. Leuctra is one of the most important battles in ancient Greek history. The engagement that ended Sparta's position as the leading land power in Greece and elevated Thebes to a period of brief but genuine regional supremacy. And the Sacred Band was at the center of the decisive moment. The architect of the Theban strategy at Leuctra was Epaminondas, one of the most innovative military commanders of the ancient world, whose tactical ideas influenced military thinking for centuries. His insight was about weight distribution. The conventional Greek phalanx deployed with roughly equal strength across its entire width, a linear formation designed to engage the enemy frontally along its full extent. Epaminondas abandoned this convention. He concentrated the best troops, including the Sacred Band, on the left wing of the Theban formation, stacking it to a depth of 50 ranks rather than the standard 12. This created an overwhelmingly powerful concentrated strike force on one end of the line, intentionally leaving the right side of the Theban formation weaker. The Spartans, following their traditional approach, placed their best troops on their own right wing, where Spartan doctrine prescribed that the strongest fighters should be positioned. This meant that the Spartan elite would be hitting the deliberately weakened Theban right, while the massed Theban left, with the Sacred Band at its cutting edge, would be hitting the Spartan right. The massed Theban left crashed into the Spartan position with irresistible force. The Spartan king Cleombrotus was killed in the engagement. The Spartan formation collapsed. Sparta lost approximately 400 Spartiates, full Spartan citizens, at Leuctra. This was a catastrophic proportion of their total citizen warrior population. The Spartan social system that had maintained their military dominance required enough full citizens to field effective armies, and the losses at Leuctra cut deep into that reserve. Sparta never fully recovered its dominant position. Within a decade, Theban armies were campaigning in the Peloponnese itself, on Spartan home territory, for the first time in recorded history. The 40 years between the Sacred Band's formation and its destruction at Chaeronea in 338 BC represent a sustained period of military excellence that is genuinely remarkable in the history of ancient warfare. For 4 decades, this unit of 300 men was not defeated. Every major engagement it fought, it won. And the question of what sustained that record, what kept 300 men at a level of fighting effectiveness that their opponents could not match across 2 generations of warfare, is one worth examining. The unit lived together in dedicated barracks provided by the Theban state. This was not simply a practical convenience. It was the mechanism by which the bonds that made the unit militarily effective were continuously maintained and renewed. Soldiers who eat together, train together, sleep in the same compound, and share the daily texture of existence develop the kind of interpersonal knowledge and attunement that makes coordinated action in the chaos of combat possible. They know how each other moves. They know each other's strengths and limitations. They can anticipate each other's responses without communication. For the Sacred Band, this general unit cohesion was amplified by the specific nature of the relationships within it. The pairs who fought together were not simply comrades who had trained alongside each other. They were people who shared the deepest possible personal commitment. The philosophical argument about shame and love that had justified the unit's formation was tested and confirmed in practice over 40 years. These were men who would not abandon each other under any circumstances because abandonment was a violation of the most fundamental bond in their lives. According to Plutarch, the daily life of the unit included not just physical training but intellectual cultivation. Music and poetry were part of the preparation not as entertainment but as additional dimensions of the coordination and attunement that made the unit function. The same musical training that made Greek soldiers dance together in civic festivals made them move together in battle. The same poetry that articulated the values of heroism, loyalty, and sacrifice reinforced those values as lived commitments rather than abstract ideals. The rise of the Sacred Band's reputation across Greece created an irony that the ancient world could not have anticipated. One of the people who studied what Thebes had built, who observed the Sacred Band's training methods and military effectiveness at close range, and who took detailed mental notes on everything he saw, was a young man who would eventually come to destroy it. His name was Philip, and he would become Philip II of Macedon. In the mid-360s BC, Philip spent 3 years in Thebes as a hostage, a diplomatic arrangement through which his family guaranteed Thebes' treaty with Macedon by giving custody of a royal son to the city. He was a teenager during this period, living in the household of a prominent Theban family, and he observed everything. He watched the Sacred Band train. He absorbed Epaminondas's tactical innovations. The oblique phalanx, the concentrated strike force, the principle of overwhelming strength at a decisive point rather than distributing strength evenly across a line. When Philip returned to Macedon and eventually became its king, he applied everything he had learned. The Macedonian phalanx that he developed, using longer spears, tighter formations, and the combination of heavy infantry with cavalry that Macedon's terrain and demographics made possible, was a synthesis of Greek tactical thinking with Macedonian resources. The strategic concepts of concentrating force, of using shock and speed rather than grinding attrition, of targeting the enemy's strongest point rather than its weakest. These came from what Philip had seen in Thebes. The Sacred Band had inadvertently trained its own destroyer. The army that would defeat it at Chaeronea in 338 BC was built in significant part on the lessons that Philip had absorbed by watching it operate. And when the moment of confrontation came, when Philip's expanded Macedonian kingdom moved south to challenge the Greek city-states, the commander who would lead the cavalry strike that broke the Sacred Band was Philip's 18-year-old son, who would become Alexander the Great. The Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC was fought in Boeotia, the region of central Greece that was Thebes' home territory. Athens and Thebes had formed an alliance to resist Macedonian expansion, and their combined forces met Philip's army on a plain near the city of Chaeronea. The stakes were the independence of the Greek city-states. The outcome would determine whether Greece remained a patchwork of self-governing polities or became part of a Macedonian-dominated political order. Philip deployed his army with the same strategic sophistication he had absorbed from his years in Thebes. The Macedonian phalanx, armed with sarissas, the long pikes that extended the reach of the formation far beyond what ordinary hoplite spears could match, held the centre and right. On the left, Philip placed his cavalry under the command of Alexander, who was 18 years old and fighting in his first major engagement. According to the ancient sources, the battle's decisive moment came when a gap opened in the Greek line. The Athenians on one wing, pressing forward in pursuit of what appeared to be a retreating Macedonian force, moved too far and too fast, opening a space between their position and the Theban troops fighting alongside them. Alexander, watching for exactly this kind of opportunity with the tactical intelligence that would define his subsequent career, drove his cavalry through the gap and wheeled to strike the Sacred Band from the flank and rear. The Sacred Band did not retreat. This is the fact that the ancient sources emphasize and that the archaeological evidence confirms. 300 men, surrounded, outflanked with the battle lost around them, continued to fight. They did not break, they did not attempt to flee. According to Plutarch and Diodorus Siculus, the Sacred Band held its position and fought until almost every member was dead. The unit that had not been defeated in 40 years ended its existence by standing its ground in a hopeless position, because standing its ground was the only thing that cohesion, love, and 40 years of shared commitment would allow them to do. After the battle, Philip walked the field. He came to the place where the Sacred Band had made its final stand, and he found them as they had died. 300 men lying in formation, in their pairs, the wounded among them having died where they fell rather than attempting to escape. According to Plutarch, Philip wept when he saw them. He stood over the bodies of the men his son had just killed, and he wept. Plutarch records what Philip said. When someone nearby suggested that these men must have done something shameful to have died this way, a remark apparently implying that they deserved their fate, Philip responded with a phrase that has survived 2,000 years. "Perish miserably, whoever thinks that these men did or suffered anything shameful." It was the highest possible tribute from the man who had just defeated them. An acknowledgement that what he was looking at was not the remains of a defeated army, but the evidence of something so far beyond ordinary human conduct that it demanded reverence rather than contempt. Philip ordered the Sacred Band buried with full honours where they had fallen. He commissioned the construction of a monument, a large stone lion, approximately 5 meters tall, to mark the grave. This was the Lion of Chaeronea, which stood at the site for over 2,000 years, through the Roman period, through the Byzantine era, through centuries of Greek history, until it was knocked over and broken at some point in the medieval or early modern period. In the 19th century, Greek archaeologists excavating near Chaeronea found the remains of the monument and, beneath it, a mass grave. What they found in that grave confirmed the ancient accounts with a precision that no historical text alone could provide. 254 skeletal remains were found, not the full 300, but a significant portion, arranged in 7 rows and showing the trauma patterns of violent death in close combat. The bones told the story of men who had died fighting, not of men who had been killed while fleeing. The Sacred Band was destroyed at Chaeronea. Thebes never recovered its brief period of dominance over Greece. Philip's victory at Chaeronea brought Greece under Macedonian authority, and when Alexander subsequently conquered the Persians in empire, the political landscape of the ancient world was transformed beyond recognition. The era of the independent Greek city-states, the world in which the Sacred Band had existed and fought, was over. But the Sacred Band's legacy was not contained within its own historical moment. It entered the broader record of what human beings are capable of, and it has never fully left. The questions it raises are not questions about ancient Greece. They are questions about what commitment means, about what drives human beings to their limits, about what we are willing to die for and why. The military historians who have studied the Sacred Band identify it as one of the earliest examples of a principle that modern military psychology has rediscovered and studied systematically. That unit cohesion, the strength of the bonds between soldiers, is a more reliable predictor of combat effectiveness than almost any other single factor. Research on military performance across multiple modern armies has consistently found that soldiers fight most effectively not for abstract ideals or national purposes, but for the people immediately around them. The Sacred Band built its entire organizational structure on this insight 400 years before the Common Era. The Lion of Chaeronea was restored and re-erected in 1902 by the Greek Archaeological Society. It stands today at the site of the battle, marking the grave of the men who died there. Every year, people visit it, not because they are military historians or classicists, but because the story of 300 men who would not abandon each other is a story that speaks to something fundamental in how human beings understand loyalty, love, and the choice to hold your ground when holding your ground is the only thing left. According to the historical record, Philip II, the man who had spent 3 years in Thebes as a young hostage, watching the Sacred Band train and learning from it, was the one who finally destroyed it. And according to that same historical record, when he saw what he had done, he wept. That response tells you everything about the nature of what the Sacred Band was. You don't weep over the defeat of an army. You weep over the end of something irreplaceable.